So, Paul, what we're really looking to do is just sort of understand your perspective from being like a really world-class producer, delivering loads of really good games across different genres. And what I wanted to do is just really think back to how did you end up in the games industry in the first place and just go from there.
Mm. So I actually started in the games industry when I was 18. I'm 39 now. So I didn't sustain my career the entire way through that gap. I've gone off and done a whole bunch of different things, a very adventurous lifestyle in a lot of ways. But I first started with Blizzard when I was 18.
Mm.
World of Warcraft had launched and had obviously gone, endo-atmospheric, and it was just crazy. Like they couldn't believe how big it had gotten. And then they opened the office. They had the French office. They opened that to be even bigger. Then they opened an Irish office as well. And
Yeah.
I can't even pin what year that would be, but we were there for that was like World of Warcraft, and we released the Burning Crusade when I was there, so that'd tell people roughly what year periods that was in. So it was my first time seeing a game as a service and experiencing that from the inside. We were all game masters. That was like the role that they had for us there. So we were talking to players one to one in game in an app. Like there was an Oracle app that they had made at the time. Again, things were really just being designed on the go because it was growing at such an incredible pace. So that was like my first. I could say lots about that. It was an amazing time. It was really. I got so lucky in landing that role. It was literally just a job posting on a game developer forum.ie a website, but it was very specific in that game knowledge was critical. And I was a huge World of Warcraft player. I was a huge World of Warcraft player. It was really important to me. I was thinking about it all the time. It was the main kind of notification in my life. What I mean there is like we didn't have smartphones. We didn't have that ping of like your iPad and your smartphone, your smartwatch going off. That stuff didn't exist. Social networking was in its infancy. And so getting into a game to see what people were saying and doing and organizing it was super critical. And that knowledge and all that time helped me with my interviews because I interviewed with a senior game producer whose name I forget, but he was a senior game producer on World of Warcraft from the production team, and they were firsthand hiring the people that they were getting to come in and support the game as game masters. So I was super nervous, and he asked me a ton of really detailed questions, but I chilled out as soon as we started talking about the game. I relaxed. It wasn't about your work skills or your intercommunication skills or your department skills or your experience. He was just like, tell me what you know about the game. I'm going to ask you some questions. And I was like, you got me. And I just relaxed then. And so that to me was my first glimmer of like, here's something I'm so passionate about. And here I am in this office where this is an official role and this is an important and critical thing. Um, and to be a product specialist, which is what that role ended up being, where you were like one person in a group of 30 people they would come to your desk. They were pinging you, they were coming to your desk. You had to become the wiki for the game. And that's actually very similar to my job today. But there's like a huge jump, hop, and skip between Blizzard. Then I also worked for Goa, who were running World. It was Mythic Entertainment. They had World Warhammer Online, Age of Reckoning. So we did that for. I think I was only there for about 9 months, and then that spanned down quite quickly. It just didn't take off in the way that they had hoped it would. And then I did some other stuff. And then I worked for Apple for a while, maybe 6 years later. I worked for ZeniMax Online on Elder Scrolls Online for a couple of years. And we in that company we actually took on some other projects as well. So that was Doom, Fallout Shelter, I think we called it at the time. I think it's called Fallout Underground. Oh no, maybe it was the other way around. I forget what they ended up naming it. The Elder Scrolls Online game, and that was a huge mixture the Elder Scrolls card game online, Legends, I think they called it. That was a huge amount of really interesting work because they were facing internally to test out these games for impressions and for QA, and then to run small QA teams internally as well, because ZeniMax is quite a big org, so they were using a lot of their own people. That might have been even a signal as to what game testing at that time was like. And the accessibility of game testing. The security of game testing. Was it there? Was it really available yet? Was it only in sit-down groups in offices that you could do it? Was there any online platform? I don't think there was, because that's got to be 10 years ago now. It's got to be about that. And then I also went back to work for Blizzard again as a project manager for a short period of time on Warlords of Draenor. So product specialist and project manager there. So it was like a 6 month contract. It was cool.
And like, would that be your favorite genre then? Or is
Um,
there other genres of games that you really love? You know,
for MMOs, is it? Is that what you mean?
yeah, yeah.
I think it's what I'm the most knowledgeable about over such a long period of time, but it is not my preferred game. In fact, I don't actually play any MMOs now.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. I think that like indie
You've had too much
gaming.
of it. Had too
I
much
think
of
I've had
it.
too much of it. Yeah, yeah. I can see the scale of the games, and sometimes the games are so big in scope and scale for me now. It's so overwhelming when I sit down in front of an MMO. I'm like, here we go. Like this is such a big time sink, and I think that a lot of those processes of getting players to experience that content has not found its way into really modern design that feels great right now. Now, people might say you're wrong for these reasons, and I probably am. But the thing is that I've just not participated in them as much. Really over the last 6 7 years. Now indie gaming and working at Raw Fury has been like a real revelation for me because I was respected indie games and was always admired them, and I would play a few here and there. Like I played Hotline Miami when that came out because it was just this buzzword, especially in like the heavy metal industry. Strangely, that game found its like audience in there. It was being mentioned in like heavy metal forums, which I was on for music. People would mention this game, and I liked that. I liked that there was this bleed in of this other indie space. Like so, you had indie music doing its thing over here, and then you had like indie games doing their thing over here, and then they were kind of meeting in the middle. Even though it's electro and that, it's heavy electro and it's
Yeah,
hardcore.
did it.
Yeah, and I just loved how excited everybody was about those games at that time. So that kind of really let me see the potential of indie games and what they were doing and what they were evolving into at that point. And then, I mean, the opportunity to work at Raw Fury was just such a no-brainer. It was immediate.
And obviously, you've been in the industry a good wee while. I'm not saying massive, you said your age at the
Mm,
start there, but over the last sort of 5 years, like what do you see from your perspective has changed, in the industry as such,
mm,
and I suppose even within producing games?
mm. I can tell you that in the I'm nearly 6 years at Raw Fury, and I can tell you in that space of time alone, there's been evolution after evolution after evolution. Like it happens every 18 months. I think that's where indie games is like spinning up, and that's why it's so impressive when a project comes out like let's say Blueprints or a game like Routine, of which like there's so much to say about like both of those projects. They come from like a much longer development path. So
Mhm.
how is it that those games come out and after being like they were in development when indie games were in a totally different space, like and meant a completely different thing to gamers and the industry. Why did they land so well then? How did that happen? How does that happen? And I think that that's something that a lot of the real big decision makers, like your CEOs and your CPOs and everything, that's the kind and finance people and everything who are all critical to indie game success and publishing. Um, it's something that they're trying to figure out too and trying to really understand. Do we want a game that was only made in the last 3 months because it's aware of everything that's happening in the last six? And do
Mm.
we want to release it in 3 months' time? Or do we want a game that was starting development 5 6 years ago and we're going to release it in a year and a half from now and it's going to change the industry? Blueprints, routine. I was like, it's crazy.
Well, I
So
suppose it always depends on the audience and whether or not there's a time period where the cycle comes back of that sort of genre and it just picks up and it's about picking the titles that maybe will come back in a couple of years' time and go, right, these developers, the talent there, can see that coming. We just milk it a bit here, tweak it, get it
mhm.
ready, bring some new stuff in, and then away we go. And it sort of hits on a different level.
I think I exhibit that opinion. I think that that's what I think as well as what I feel. It's the cyclic thing. I think routine's a great example and blueprints are great examples of that, where you could go back in time 8 years ago, 10 years ago, and you could find a similar trend or title that was like kind of doing as well as it was and was as popular. And then that dipped off, but
Yeah.
then we catch the return of it. Um, with two titles that just like people say redefines these things, but I think yeah.
And so obviously, it sounds like a lot of the games that you've worked on have been happening for a long periods of time. So obviously,
Mm.
there's a lot of conversations going on.
Mhm.
What sort of challenges or does the producer face in that sort of space from an external and internal? Because you've sort of seen it
Mm.
It sounds like you've seen it from two different places, very close to the game team, and then
Mm,
obviously maybe as a separate within the publishing side where you're
mm.
working with teams. Like, how have you found those challenges in different ways?
I think I think also as like producers go and as company organizations go, I mean, we restructured ourselves internally too several times over the course of some games where developers are having to they're having to adjust to our adjustments. You know, we're changing our internal structure. We're changing our cadence of comms and approach and the depth of information that we need to be able to help publish these games to the maximum of their ability, of our ability. Um, and so they're like, why are things changing? I'm getting a new person. They have a new title and they have all these things. And it's like, because we're still trying to do the best thing for you when this comes to shipping date. And we know that we need to change for all these reasons. Like my main focus now is in player experience. And this was because that narrowing of our roles had to happen. We also now have things like a product manager, and product manager kind of straddles the line between the deep financial scraping and analysis of like the market and its viability for all these reasons. It's like the kind of the boring stuff, you know, but the really critical stuff, the really, really important things to understand when and how best to position a game within a market, and to understand the game's content, features, and its ambitions as a game in order to position it correctly within the market. So that's a product manager. I mean, we didn't have those a few years ago. So like a new discipline. And we also didn't have my role a few years ago, which is just to focus on the game and the player experience, and to do that using a lot of different data sets, including from you guys.
Yeah. And you know, producing a game is no mean feat. You've obviously been working with a lot of good teams, and you've got a good, seems like there's a good support system around the back there to make things work from different points of views.
Mm,
But you've been able to keep a track record of the games that you've been working on and overseeing, that they've gone out and they've been hitting a certain quality bar, and they're always pushing the game. You know, what could you say to people trying to do something similar? So, like, what wisdom could you offer other producers at trying to like hit that sort of level of quality, like Blueprints and Routine, those games that are really going out there and they're the cult successes in a way, you know? So, how do you get that connection with the audience, and how are you trying to like what wisdom could you offer
mm,
other producers to think right? You know, what would you be recommending?
mm. There's so many different ways to chalk this down, and you could talk to me at any 6 month period and I'd probably have a different perspective, or I'd lean into a different like methodology or something like that. But I think that the truest thing, regardless of all these different systems that you can use, you know, you could talk about all these different, like a quality milestone and an experience milestone should merge for all of these reasons, but they should also differ for these reasons. Like that's the kind of paper theory, you know, and that is super critical. It helps everybody on both teams know what you're headed toward, what you're expecting, what your goals are. It helps you to set KPIs and everything, so that are, you know, you're not just guessing, are you on track? It's a huge amount of that in gaming, huge amount of just kind of how's it going, and yeah, it's playing pretty good right. And a lot of producers will know exactly what I'm talking about, where they're trying, especially publishing producers, whatever about development production. And we've done development production here. We've taken on teams where they have no producer, and the core developer, the lead developer, doesn't have the experience, or the just the, I guess, the head to try and sit down and plan their whole game out in blocks, in sprints, you know, in milestones, in deliverables. They're not thinking that way. You know, they're deep in the art of their game, very deep in the code of their game, very like skilled and intelligent people. But then when it comes to that business material side of things, maybe they don't have that. And so I've ran dev production on a few games where you're doing the sprints and you're doing all the check-ins from the dev side, and then bringing that information again inwardly to the publishing side to translate everything. But I think that again, that's all paper theory stuff. So the thing that I would suggest to and just remind producers of more than anything is that the developer is making the game, and you will learn the most about their ability to make that game on time, on budget, and to the quality expectation that your company has if you have a very strong and trusting relationship with that developer. And I think that that is just, it's, we can talk about AI all day. We can talk about all these different things that are jobs that are going to get pushed out for all these number of reasons. And you can argue both sides of that. But the thing that does not change is the ability for a person to develop a trusting relationship with somebody like a developer to get the real information about how the project is going, how they're feeling, what their work rate is like, what their fears are, where their confidence is, what their fears are, and what risk that imposes on the project, so that we can be real about, are we all heading toward the same release date and the same quality bar and all these things? Because if we're not, and we still have 8 months left, we can tell our partners, we can offset our, our marketing efforts, and all of these things can shift. But if you don't have that truth with your developer and that relationship, you'll never get that information until it's nearly too late, until they're forced to give it over to you, that they're struggling, that they're burned out, that they can't do a thing, that they don't want to do a thing, and then you're left at the last minute, kind of getting that information, and it's difficult for everybody involved. So building strong, trusting relationships with your devs will always be the first thing that you should do. Everything else you can learn and will change.
In that area, just that one wee piece of wisdom, the relationship, how would you go about, like, what would be your way? Like, do you need to be like so knowledgeable about the game? Does it, because you have so much knowledge about the games that you're working on, that they go, this person understands me? Like, how do you get on their wavelength? How can a producer do that? Like, what would be a tip there to get, how do I get on that wavelength of that person so I get the best out of them? It's a bit like football management.
Mm-hmm. You've said it. It is
Oh,
literally learn everything about their game that you possibly can, especially if you're in a situation like I am. I actually live in Dublin, in Ireland, and a lot of my immediate publishing team is in Stockholm. They're also in other countries, and our developers are all over the world, different time zones, different cultural norms, different communication styles. I'm talking to you now in the afternoon Irish time, right? Late afternoon Irish time. I could be taking a call from somebody who's just waking up, who's just at the start of their day, and I'm coming at them with a certain amount of energy that I have now at this time of day, and we're all raring to go. And somebody else is just, they were up late, they were sitting in front of their computer till 3 in the morning or whatever. We have a meeting scheduled for this time. You know, are you aware of that as a producer? Are you aware of like that little gap in comms between you, and that you might get better information and a better kind of communication paths from this guy at 3 in the afternoon? And is it possible for you to try and figure out a way to go about that and to get that information? Can you take a call at 11 at night on your time, so that you see what I'm saying?
yeah,
So
100%.
those kinds of things should be and are number one for basically for all of Raw Fury. I think that we all are very malleable and flexible with those things for the reasons I just said, and that stuff in turn with learning everything you possibly can about their game, playing it thoroughly back to back, asking about their game, describing what you think their game is. A developer loves to hear what you think when you are playing their game. They want to know what it is that you're thinking and experiencing, because they're just spinning in their own head about the things that they think and they're experiencing, and they're making stuff up about how something will be perceived. But you can be one of the first benchmarks for their game. And then as we go forward, we can go into playtesting, and we can go into public playtesting and all this other stuff that creates all these other different layers. But the relationship starts with who and when you're communicating with, meeting them in the best possible place and time zone, and then being a strong resource for their game, a mirror for their game back at them, being able to talk about everything, being excited about what's next, inquisitive about what's planned. And that those are the strengths, and then everything comes after that: the truth of their personal life, the struggles that they're dealing with that are slowing them down in their production, that are making them not able to focus, their burnout that they're feeling, the real life problems. Because we're remotes too. I don't know that his car tire burst, and he's not able to move his car in the morning, and it's costing him all this money, and he can't think of how to fix it or something like that. You get that when you have a good personal relationship with somebody. And while it's hard to do it remotely, it's not impossible, and we should all be striving for that. Yeah.
Okay. And if you could, so you've got that would be your one core nugget. If you can get on the same wavelength as the developer, you've got a more chance of seeing success for both parties. It's a win-win
Mm,
ultimately, is what your goal is there. You know, And you sort of like during that conversation, you sort of talk about bringing in sort of like the phases where you're starting to bring in play testing, and it sounds like even your own internal testing of the game and how they're getting to see that, and that interaction with you builds up this sort of relationship and understanding of like we're all going in the right direction, we're all aligned. You know, how do you, in your opinion, when you think of that play testing phase and your sort of the feedback phase, really, that those feedback
Mm,
loops, what's the most influential things that you start to see when you're working with a developer that they then start, oh, how does it help them and what influences that alignment and that sort of like trajectory towards a high quality
mm,
game?
mm. I think that what you'll find when you start to give feedback is that the developer will process it in order of the immediate questions that they had. Did somebody like this? I wonder, will they like this? I wonder if they think this is a good feature. They'll gravitate toward that straight away because they want affirmation, confirmation of any of those things. That's what they're looking for. So they're immediately going to the areas of the most familiar feeling that they have. They'll start to see information that is something unexpected that they weren't aware of, that they weren't expecting. And they might have to shelve that for a little bit and be like, oh, that's kind of wobbled me a little bit. I thought that that was fine. I thought that I didn't even think about that. And this is suddenly saying that this is a big problem or that it was quite jarring. They might shelve that for a little bit. Then they'll root through and find other things that they think are a great idea and that they didn't think of, but that they'll grab that and they're going to throw that on the top of their to-do list because they see as like that's a good idea. It's also quick, and I think I can address it, and I'm going to put it right up here. And a lot of what you'll actually find is with playtest results, a lot of it is being interpreted by the person who's going to do the work. It's not being interpreted in indie gaming, at least. It's not being interpreted by the producer who's just going to schedule the work and is going to plan the work and can kind of do that with a more binary approach, right? They can take it all in, map it all out. They can figure out the exact like burn down and difficulty of any of these issues that they're going to have, and then they'll just apply it to their teams. And you'll get that with larger AA, AAA teams. With a solo developer, which we work with a lot of solo developers that have a few people helping out, or they're small teams of like 4 or 5 people that again have like some third party assistance in different areas. Maybe somebody drops in sometimes to do some effects or whatever it might be. But the team's usually very small. So when they're looking at feedback, they're thinking about it as workload a lot of the time. They're looking at this as tasks, and that's heavy to look at. That's heavy to look at. If you've had 40 people play test your game and you have 40 surveys and 6 sessions, so now you actually have like 120 surveys or whatever it might be, because they did a survey every session. You know what I mean? You see how all that material compounds, right? It's a wall of information. It's a huge amount of data, and it's so overwhelming because it can feel like work, difficulty, tasks, not green lights, lots of red lights, lots of things that are going to slow me down. And now I'm going to start to disagree with some of it because it's too heavy for me. You know what I mean? I can't kind of fathom it. And so I think that where a platform like you guys, where the takeaways, the top 6 takeaways, the executive findings in the summaries of these reports, that makes 120 reports, 6 actionable areas of things that we can actually work on. 6 great areas, things people really enjoyed. 6 areas of opportunity. And that kind of thing I think is really useful. I think it was 6 the last time we looked at, but there's we shift things around on the back end there sometimes. But like I'll take that information then, working in player experience, and I'll distill it even further. I'll bring it down even further. And we might do 2 tests. Might do one at the start of a month, one 6 weeks later with a milestone build in the middle, or maybe at the end. And then we'll like overlap those 2 tests and say, okay, what happened? What changed? What do we introduce? What's similar? Maybe we'll do 2 different group types. We might do a community that feels close to us and they're testing our game, so they're soft. And then we might do anonymous play testers who have no loyalty to us whatsoever. They're just looking at the game as a system to master. They're not here to like support our vision or be part of our joyous community. They're actually coming in kind of mean, and they're being very sterile in their feedback. And I take 2 of those reports and I'll try and find the marriage between the 2 of them. And I'll distill that information down into something like practical, something really actionable, and something that supports what they're doing and also gives them some things to do. And then we can go into the binary stuff later. So as far as like, so when it comes to the testing results, it is important, obviously, to show them the results in their raw format. You should show them the surveys. They should have access to all the same information that you do. But you'll want to probably be a little barrier between that information first. You want to walk them through it. You don't want to just throw test results at somebody. Like anybody could do that. And as a producer, you have a responsibility to the impact of information that you're giving to your developer at different stages of development. Because once the game is public, that's it. Once the game is out there, all the articles, the Steam reviews, the people on Twitter, like they're all going to have their opinion. They're going to say whatever it is that they want to say, and the developer is exposed to all of that. So you'll want to set some good expectations about, we're doing this test early. We're doing this test a year and a half before release. We only expect this to score 60 out of 100, maybe even less. And if you can, and we think that that's good. And if you can set that expectation first with your dev, they're not hurt by seeing that score come in. And they also know that you're not panicking, that you as a publishing partner are not looking at the score 62 out of 100 and you're going to pull the brakes on the whole project. No, you set in advance what you think it's going to do. And then nobody is shocked or afraid or anything. And if you're getting more than that, amazing. If you're getting less than that, great time to refocus your upcoming milestones, your next test rounds, because it should be a growth curve. It'd be very strange if you were testing a game, halfway through its development and it was scoring, 85 out of 100 and 90 out of 100. You think, what's going on? Like, we have so much more to go. I mean, it's still good, but it's really to say for the majority case, which is that the scores are going to feel a certain way. The information is going to feel a certain way. And you want to use this information to nourish and grow development and steer it in the right direction. And if you need to realign or refocus or shift around a little bit, that's what this information is for. It is not there to stress anybody out or to cause panic or to cause uncertainty within the developer, especially. Publishers, that's what we're here to do. We will panic internally. We will stress internally. We will do all these things. That's what we should do. And the developer should be kind of, really cared for. But this information creates major clarity for everybody involved. So it's up to you then. How do you dial that focus in with the developer? How do you describe it and relay it?
Just one of the things I think it's quite common to think about as an indie developer, having run an indie studio myself in the past, is that you do have this sort of like, oh, I've got all this feedback and I've got workload. And I think when you said it earlier on about that workload, how do you sort of like make them understand that, being able to watch people play and seeing their survey data, that can really help them? How do you get that mindset shift? Or is it that you're distilling it for them to just to reduce that? But is there still this point where you're having to do something as a producer to go like, this is worthwhile? You need to take a step back.
There is, and that's very developer related. What I mean is it depends on the developer. So it's some developers are like, they want to just smush me in the face and say, let me at the data. They just want to see the survey. They want to watch all the play tests. They're eating their dinner, watching all these play tests. They're sitting in bed at night on their iPad, watching all these play tests. They're watching everything. And that's what they want. They want to just get to that stuff. We still have a responsibility to front load that, to set expectation, to introduce the information, but maybe you don't have to go too far with kind of, writing a thesis on what it means, or, the comparative reporting, what does this mean for these features, this part of the project or whatever. And again, so it depends on the developer, but by and large, all you're trying to do as a producer is get them to accept what players are saying. And so there's just different ways to do it. And with different people, you'll have to do it in different ways. And as producers, you're going to communicate in different ways. My job is to communicate in the clearest and most certain terms, while also giving our position and our expectations, and so that there's no fear or doubt or uncertainty within the developer. Sometimes they don't care what I think. They only want to know what the player thinks. And I'm like, well, then go for it. It's all right there. And let's talk about it afterwards. And so there's just different ways to do it. But
it sounds like you've got, is there any stories that you could share? Because it sounds like there's been things in the past. Is there any story where having the developer actually watch the footage going, that has helped the situation of alignment? Because I think that's what you've always sort of harped on from the start, is if we're aligned as a unit, both the publisher and the developer, then we're heading in the right direction. We can see
Mm-hmm.
success looks like. But is there any times or any stories you could share that would say like this watching the footage has helped influence the conversations that we've been having? Don't have to name teams or studios or anything. Like, just really.
Mm. Well, I mean, I can say that without a shadow of a doubt. Surveys have steered games in a huge way. They have helped us to reduce priority on certain features, increase priority on others, um, introduce things. And that's like reading the gaps between feedback because a player is not telling you always what they're missing. Sometimes they're just telling you what they're feeling. And so you need to understand what the interpretation of that feeling, like why are they feeling that? Why are they feeling frustrated here? Why are they now feeling despondent about this feature when they used to like it, but now they don't like it? Was it the feature or was it something related to that feature that's now causing them to feel like they don't like this thing anymore? And that's a huge one, actually. Is that because you have to remember, players are not game designers by and large. They're not game designers, and they're also not like just professionals in a project industry. They're not sitting down and writing you a thesis either. A lot of the time, they're sitting with a headset on, playing a video game, and saying what they think, what they feel, and then it is up to us to reverse engineer from that kind of end emotional state all the way back through to our feature sets and the UI and UX and everything and say, this is why this signal happened downstream here. And then you can do that when you have information en masse, right? You have 20 players that have played it. Now you can confirm it across 11 of these players, all said the same kind of thing in the same sort of window. None of them told us what the solution is. That's fine. But they all indicated that this problem was surfacing around here. And now our design team can get in there and analyze that and figure out what the thing is that's missing. And they can rectify it. So now when we go through that playtest in that area again, there is no shift in emotions. We stay exactly with the trust level that we had earned before that. It sustains through that period. Players were happy. They didn't know that they were going to be unhappy. They didn't know that what we did elevated things. They just know that they now sustained this state through that particular period of the game or whatever it is. I'm trying to be very careful with what I say because I could be very specific, but I hope that that's kind of getting across how useful it is.
Do you feel do you feel that there's anything from watching footage that you'll just never get in a survey? Because obviously there's loads of data coming in, but like from just watching the raw people playing the game, like what do you think you get from that that you just don't get on the survey side?
You have to see people playing your game. You can never just take an opinion from somebody who's just finished and said, "Yeah, it was great." And now that's your survey. Is that somebody said it was good? I mean, or that your best friend said it's really cool. You need to over the shoulder watch somebody play to understand the subconscious things that are happening, the gameplay that's happening mechanically with their eyes and with their hands that are not lining up and then causing the player to have to think at a time when they probably shouldn't have to. And so that's like a UI and UX disassociation, but you can only see that over somebody's shoulder. You just cannot see that in a survey because the survey and professional surveyors and professional researchers, of which I am not, they will tell you a bunch of theory around surveys and why they the science of a survey, the leading question, the seeded answer or response, using a certain word loads a player's answer, and so you have to be careful with what wording you use. If you're like, think of anything but a purple elephant, I mean, you're doing the purple elephant thing. But if you say think of anything and they say purple elephant to you, well, now that's a more usable survey, right? With something you did before. And so we have to be really careful with that stuff. But I think that the marriage of the two is really important because there's also a disassociation between the two. Sometimes you'll watch somebody play through a game and you'll hear sighing or frustration or tutting, and you could watch 2 hours of somebody playing a game and go, "Ooh, this guy really didn't like this" or whatever. Then you go to the survey and they're like 4 out of 5, and you're like, "Really?" And they're like, "Yeah, it was really good. Really liked all these things about it." This guy, and you're like, "Okay." So, and then vice versa. You have somebody who sounded like they were having a fun time in the game. Then it gets to the survey and they dunk on you in a huge way. And so again that interpretation layer that I mentioned earlier about it's a producer's job to go in there and understand this, to be exposed to a huge amount of data sets between different games, and to then be able to make great future commentary on what they're seeing, no matter what the game is, especially if the information seems to be conflicting in some ways. You'll learn after a while a lot more about player motivations and response systems.
And for some of the more challenging things that you've had, because obviously we talked about stories, didn't we sort of scratch the surface there, but um, in the challenging situations, did you ever utilize gameplay as a like you can see fundamentally there is challenges here, no
Mm-hmm.
matter we understand what vision that you're going for, but those challenges, you're not going to have people find the fun in your game if you
Yeah.
still keep down that route. Is if you had any of those type of discussions where you've had to use footage to basically go, oh no, no,
Yes.
you need to change this.
Yeah, we do. We use footage all the time. We'll direct link into a video to an exact moment so that there's no doubt about what the player experienced. Even if they were a 4 out of 5 or 5 out of 5 surveyor, we'd have to point them to this red zone in the test
Mm.
where we're like, this person is actually a big supporter of your game. They're a positive person, an optimistic personality type. They want to lean into the positive and everything. This area was jarring. This area that you see in this timeline was confusing, was causing irritation and frustration. As soon as you move from challenge to frustration, you're losing a player at that stage. Frustration is not an emotion that we want to feel as gamers at all. We can be, again, we can be challenged, we can be even angry at outcomes, but like anger might be because I lost in the exchange or I lost in this, but frustration means I'm trying to do something, it is not working, I don't know why it's not working, I'm lacking information and there's things missing here. And so like visual footage is so important. And also there's this timeline, in the Go Testify records, because and the Go Testify backend, because I'm one person. Now we have a few people who are now doing player experience at our company. That's how important we see the position as. Um, I I feel like one of the most useful things for me is not just the summaries, like the kind of written summaries. I like the written summaries, but I also like to make up my own mind. That's my personality type too. And so when I look at the timelines, there's this extra like timeline beneath the video tracker that's like this red and green lines, and they show these moments of like positivity, negativity, and so on. And being able to, it's like a heat map. Um, Being able to look at this like heat map of impressions across a 2 hour timeline. I don't have 120 hours in the week to look at all footage back to back. Neither does a developer. So we use these additional tools within the GT platform to be able to narrow in on the exact thing that's happening. So I can look at this heat map across 6 videos really quickly and say they're all here. They're all red in this spot here. Now, what is that spot? And then I can go there in the video and confirm, yeah, they're all in roughly the same place. Oh, the same thing is taking place here over and over again. And so that kind of, visual tool, I think, within the GT platform is super useful. And that is related to the capture of footage and how important footage is to have, not just surveys.
Well, thanks very much for saying it. There was no need to sort of bring our platform in, but I think the concept is like you've been able to utilize the video footage to get a point across, and you've been able to use it to narrow a problem area, no matter if they give it a 90 out of 100 or a 5 out of 5. It wasn't really about that. Those nuance, those smaller points, we can take it to the next level if we look at that. And I think you can see that the titles that have been coming through that you've been looking over, they've all been
Mm,
hitting a really good bar. And
mm,
then that obviously helps with wish lists and conversions for yourselves.
yes.
But you know, going forward then over the next couple of years, like what should a producer be thinking about to create that repeat success? Because obviously discovery, things getting far, far tougher to sort of break through. And yes, there's all these wee niche pockets of different markets opening up. And I think the indie space is doing a brilliant job of like open up games to a lot more
Hmm.
people, a lot different variations of games. But how do you see the the producer's role sort of evolving? You've sort of already said for yourself is like we're even moving from producer to player experience now, which
Mm,
is like getting close to a game director.
mm,
But how do
mhm,
you see the roles sort of evolving in the sort of production from yourself over the next couple of years?
mm. I think it's going to be about staying fixed to the truth, really. And that's from speaking from a publisher position, okay? A publisher employs people. We also technically employ developers. Like we pay the salaries for the teams to make the games that we think are a cool idea. So the cool idea that they have, whether it's a paper pitch, kind of rare for people to sign paper pitches, but if you're very experienced of dev team, that happens. Um, or a vertical slice that they have. Take the small little piece of the game and say that's cool, and then they need a couple of years and they need a bunch of help from different people to actually make the game. And then we have all these other peripheral and ancillary people, like your finance people, your marketing people, your community people, all these like critical disciplines to publish a game. Money has to be generated, and that can only happen where truth is involved about the thing that we're working on. So I'm a 2D artist. I'm concept artist as well. I adore art and creativity, game development. I fully respect the feel and the craft and everything. I want developers to just make games that they love and think are great. And now that like self-publishing is so accessible and so like abundant in information to do it correctly with huge success stories all across the board to support that avenue, you can do anything you want. If you have the time, you have the skills, do anything that you want. But I think within publishing, production, and being producers in that sense, our responsibility is pretty high. We have a responsibility to every single person who works at our company, every development team that we have, so that we can sustain all of their projects at the same time as releasing the new ones, at the same time as keeping our doors open. And so I think that the job for producers is discovering and establishing what the truth is of the project that you're working on and the thing that you're trying to release. Because that doesn't change with technology. Because we could talk about, oh, they should use this and that, and everyone, it's all theory, working theory. But the top thing remains that if you're strapped to the reality of what you're doing, then let's use all the tools that we can to make sure that we ship in that direction. But don't
And
lose sight of it.
when you talk about truth, are you talking about the uniqueness of what the vision is that someone's trying to create this experience? Is it the experience, the intended experience, it's going to be different? Is it that uniqueness that you're sort of alluding to? Or,
I think it's that
or is it expectations of what's possible within the remits of the developer, like sort of like that control factor? You talked about the product managers earlier, like
yeah.
obviously that their role is to sort of like keep everyone within a
Mm-hmm,
budget online and not do
mm-hmm,
feature scope. And
mm-hmm,
obviously
mm-hmm,
in player experience and all of that, you're going to see things where opportunities and developers will always want to go, oh, I can
mm-hmm,
just tweak this or do this. So,
mm-hmm,
but is it like when you talk about truth, is it about okay, when we started off in this is what your vision was, and if you do
mm-hmm,
that, yes, it's cool, and yes, people might love it, but they might love it, and
mm-hmm,
it might just take your game in a different direction of what
mm-hmm,
sort of set off. So
mm-hmm.
that, yeah,
I think all those examples are part of that truth I'm talking about. I think it's like this universal truth of uh, what is the game that we're making? Why are we making it? Why is that feature going in there? Why is this feature not going in there? Why are we doing this based on the survey results instead of this? Why are we releasing it on that date and not this date? It is just seeking that truth no matter what, and to not hope that you can just roll the dice and that you're working on a game and you're going to release it at a time and we're just going to kind of blindly move forward and hope for something anomalous, because we have some very talented people that work in our finance team. Well, I say our finance team. We obviously have a finance team that's really involved in like the money side of things for our company and other people's companies and everything. But then there's another like sales team that have data scraping and forecast. I believe, sorry, that's what that department is actually called. It's a forecast team. And so like they're involved in getting as much binary information as is possible, historical binary information as is possible, to understand trends and patterns and to then take a translation of the game that we're working on from somebody like the product manager and the publishing producer and the player experience managers, and then say, okay, this is what we think this is, and here's where we see it on this graph of historical data if it scores this. So
Yeah.
if it scores this and we do this in this window and it is these things, it's a sandbox game, it's a builder, it's any of these things, this is where we think it will go. And so they're trying to translate a lot of the subjective and the objective into something that can be that truth center. And then we should all be working toward that, including the developer. Does that require some amount of deviation from their original vision pre-signing with the publisher? Maybe they do have to change some of their ideas. Maybe they do have to adapt on something. That should not be seen as a that shouldn't be seen as like artistic like reduction at all. It should be seen as steering your art in the direction of like of a destination. Now you have a destination. Before you mightn't have had a destination, but now we've created a destination. You know, this much market reach, this many players. We love this critic score from it. All these things, and a great publisher and production team should be able to put that on the horizon, and then it ultimately it is in the hands of the developer to take all that information on and say, okay, then, and like steer toward that. And then we'll all help to do that. But at the end of the day, it is up to the developer. But creating that truth is really, really important.
Like that's to sort of like close everything off. Like in my mind, what I've sort of taken away from listening to you is that, you know, if you're a producer coming into a studio, maybe you didn't start with that studio and you're working with them at any level, really
Mm,
getting close to the developers and the game director's design intent, really understand that so you can talk to them and you can create a common ground that you can work towards something.
mm,
And yes, know that there's going to be challenges, but that's going to happen. So that'd be one. Two is like get information around you that can help you validate that you are going in the right direction, whatever
mhm,
source that is, whether from a sales forecasting to, you know, player experience side of things where you're capturing
mhm,
gameplay and all of that information to help them. And then making sure there's a reason why it's going out and it's doing it and having set pillars. You know, like we're building this game with these pillars, and this is what we should be grading on as we go through our journey,
mhm,
so that there's an easy way for everyone to go, yep, we are on the right track or not. So
mhm,
having some sort of common ground there.
mhm,
And obviously, um, I know that you've done that really well personally, and you've done that within the organization a lot of times. And I think it's great for me to sort of chat with you and understand, you know, on a deeper
mhm,
level, you know,
mhm.
what's going on in your head as well as
Yeah.
the developers. But I really appreciate you sort of chatting with me and sort of talking through these things. And is there one last thing that you would sort of offer as advice from a developer that would help them just make the best game possible? We'll finish on an eye here, maybe, you know.
I think I think you need to do the thing for you ultimately. You need to do the thing for you. And if you're doing the thing for you, now that can mean a lot of different things. When I say do the thing for you, that is not saying don't listen to anybody else. Don't learn from anybody else. Don't research or study or investigate anybody else. But it is somewhere in the middle of that. And so doing the thing for you, do the work, do the research, do the study, do the surveys, do the feedback, do the iterations, you know, do all of that stuff, but do it for you and realize that even the hard decision that you make and the one that tugs maybe at your creative response center, and that especially that kind of initial reaction that you have, if it's a knee-jerk reaction of pushback that you tend to have around your creative space, your art and everything, analyze that and decide, is this for me, is that response going to help me, that the response I'm having right now, is that going to help me to have this like end game success, and question those things too. But then regroup after you've opened all of those windows and let all that information in and not shut it out. Then regroup and decide what is the best thing for me to do here. And it might still be go in your direction and do your thing, and I would support that 100%, as long as you know all that other work that what is it in the gym you call it sweat equity, but I don't know what you call it in games. I don't think we've got a term for it in games yet, but it is about that, like that thing you've got to do. You've got to like just wring out that dishcloth to make sure there's nothing left in there. Now you can do some work again. And I think that if we do that as all parts of game development, then we will have all the successes one after another, because there's hundreds of millions of gamers looking for your game. And it's up to you. The onus is on you to make it the best that it can be. But do it for you at the end of the day.
I think it's an awesome point and a good way to finish the conversation.